Mr. Furley, what are you doing?
Never mind what I'm doing. What are they doing?
Nothing.
Oh, don't give me that. I heard. Rub-a-dub-dub, come hop in my tub. I heard all of it.
That performance by Don Knotts is one of the most iconic moments in Three's Company, but it was not effortless. It came from someone genuinely intimidated by the cameras, and nobody on set even knew it. That's just one of the 10 weird facts about Three's Company that'll make every rewatch feel completely different. The second that theme song came on every Tuesday at 9 p.m., the mood in the room just changed. John Ritter could trip over nothing and make you spit out your drink laughing. Suzanne Somers said the wrong thing at the worst moment and still made it feel perfect. And Joyce DeWitt somehow kept it all from completely falling apart. If you ever found yourself smiling just thinking about that tiny apartment 201 full of chaos, this is where you belong. Before we begin, like the video and subscribe, and share this with someone who still remembers waiting all week for Three's Company to come on. Larry Dallas, played by Richard Klein, was never meant to stay. The writers needed someone slick, smooth, and just a little bit shady to pop in, push a goofy bit, and disappear. But Larry came in as a slick, used car salesman with charm and just enough sleaze that left a lasting impression, and it was all evident in the pet scene. Remember that mix of sly persuasion and borderline blackmail to get the roommates to accept the pet? That was exactly the kind of mischief needed to make him a regular. Even the interplay between him and Ritter was too valuable to appear just once. It was just enough to make him part of the show's backbone. By season 4, Larry was in the opening credits. He went on to appear in 110 episodes across 7 seasons. The only character besides Jack Tripper to show up in Three's Company and both of its spinoffs. And that shows the kind of actor Klein actually was. He capitalized on the cameo moment and became one of the most memorable figures on the show. We got to know him as the guy who always knew a guy. He was also the guy who always had a plan, even the terrible ones that spiraled at the Regal Beagle. The spark between him and Ritter never faded. Just weeks before Ritter died in 2003, the two of them spent time together in the Pacific Palisades. These were two men who found something real inside a fictional room and refused to let it go. But if you think Larry's rise was unlikely, what happened before Jack was cast changes everything. Before John Ritter ever brought his clumsiness to the apartment, 3 other men stood in line for the job. First up was Billy Crystal. He was sharp, quick, and cerebral. Put him in that Santa Monica apartment, and Jack Tripper becomes a completely different animal. You get less pratfalls and more punchlines. He was the kind of guy who talks himself into trouble instead of tripping into it, but he walked out without the part. And that opens up a whole world of what-ifs. How wild would Three's Company have felt with Crystal in Ritter's shoes? Barry Van Dyke, the son of Dick Van Dyke, also threw his name in the ring. But given his calm and charming vibe, it's hard to imagine him creating the frantic puppy dog panic Ritter pulled off so effortlessly. Then there was Michael Lembeck. He was a finalist for both Fonzie on Happy Days and Jack Tripper on Three's Company. Yet he landed neither. But honestly, his Jack would still be wanting. He would have been streetwise and sardonic. Imagine a Jack that reacted to chaos instead of creating it. All 3 could have each built something real in that apartment, but Ritter had the upper hand. He didn't just play Jack Tripper, he made you root for him every single time he fell down. That combination of pure physical chaos and genuine warmth underneath was the it factor. That casting might have turned out perfect, but what happens next behind the scenes feels far less comfortable. When Somers left in 1981, the producers needed a new face fast. They settled on Priscilla Barnes to play Terry Alden for the show's final 3 seasons. On paper, it looked like a breakthrough. In reality, it took about 2 episodes for her to realize she'd walked into something she didn't want to be a part of. She then asked to be let out of her contract. The producers said no. They had just lost Somers, and they were not about to hand another actress the exit door that easily. So, Barnes stayed and did 70 episodes over 3 years, every one of them an exercise in quiet endurance. She later explained everything. The producers were controlling in ways that went beyond creative disagreement. They micromanaged her appearance constantly. On one week, they would call her out because her hair was too blonde. Then on another week, the problem would be that the hair wasn't blonde enough. She described going up against those men as genuinely difficult. And you believe her, because DeWitt had something similar. What's worth understanding is that Barnes wasn't fragile. She was the woman who had been offered the role of Willie Scott in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, but she turned it down because her contract wouldn't allow it. That's not someone who wilts easily. She's a person who knew exactly what she was capable of, but she spent 3 years being told it didn't matter. But Barnes had it easy compared to the legend who walked onto that set absolutely terrified of his own audience. 5 Emmy Awards, decades in the business, and Don Knotts still shows up to Three's Company like a complete amateur. What was it that rattled him? For almost 2 decades, he played Barney Fife in The Andy Griffith Show. This show used one camera, and it had no live audience. You filmed a scene and moved on. Three's Company was the complete opposite. There were 3 cameras on set running at once and a packed studio audience. He was also the oldest person on that set by a significant margin. Despite his achievements, he still sat in the wings, unsure if he could keep up. That alone says a lot about how intense that environment really was. Then he walked out. What happened next is the part where everything shifted. Scenes had to be reshot, not because Knotts made mistakes, but because DeWitt couldn't stop laughing. She would deliver a line, wait for him to finish, and then fall apart. Some actors would shrink under such pressure, but Knotts flipped it entirely. Every bit of fear became fuel for the mastery you nearly ran out of breath watching. The man came in afraid of the audience, but the audience ended up afraid they would miss something. Now, Knotts' fear almost cost him the role, but something else far darker almost cost Somers that role too. The day before her audition, Somers was on a small plane over the Caribbean. There was lightning all around, and the aircraft was dropping hundreds of feet at a time. The pilot told the passengers to prepare for impact. Then, somehow, he managed to get the plane under control and they landed safely. At that time, she wasn't finding much work, and the near crash had really shaken something loose. The kind of urgency that makes a struggling actress lie awake at night had vanished. So she decided to call it quits and focus elsewhere. But a friend talked her into going anyway. So she went in with nothing to lose. No nerves, no desperation. And against all odds, she got the part. The thing about that calm she walked in with is you can't manufacture it. Casting directors feel it instantly. Somers didn't force herself to perform relaxed. She just existed in it. What made it work is simple. She wasn't chasing approval in that room, and she knew one thing. When you stop performing for approval, the character shows up naturally. As you're about to discover, surviving the crash was nothing compared to what the network actually put her through next. But before we continue, who made you laugh the most on Three's Company? Was it Jack, Chrissy, or maybe Janet? Drop your memories in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. By season 5, Somers was earning $30,000 an episode. John Ritter was earning $150,000. She did the math, and it made her furious, so she asked for equal pay. ABC's response? A $5,000 raise, just enough to make the problem feel like it had been addressed without actually addressing it. And that gap reveals a lot. This wasn't just the Three's Company problem, it was a Hollywood problem that had been running for decades. The industry had always paid women less, even if they were in equally lead roles. It just rarely got caught openly doing it so nakedly in public. Somers didn't create that inequality, she just refused to pretend that it wasn't there. And the striking part is that this is still the story you see today. One where women actors in lead roles, just like their co-creators, often earn far less than the men, even when carrying the show. Things fell apart fast. Somers stopped showing up for tapings. Ritter and DeWitt stopped speaking to her. The tension got so bad that producers came up with a system that nobody had even ever needed before. They created 2 sets of color-coded scripts. Blue meant Chrissy was in the scene, pink meant she was not. So tense was the situation that Ritter and DeWitt needed advance warnings just to prepare themselves emotionally for sharing a set with her. Later on, Somers was no longer allowed on set with Ritter and DeWitt. She would be escorted by a security guard to a separate soundstage to do her roles, which had been reduced to phone calls. Her role also got cut to 60 seconds per episode. When her contract expired, ABC did not renew it. But that fallout didn't just end on set, it turned into silence that lasted decades. In addition to losing her role, Somers lost Janet too. Her co-star saw the demands as divisive and cut her off. 2 women who had spent years pretending to be best friends on screen no longer saw eye to eye. It's clear the silence was really not about money. These were two women who saw the same show through completely different eyes. DeWitt had a master's degree in fine arts from UCLA. Acting was her calling, her craft, her identity. Somers was a single mother who needed to feed her family. Neither of them was wrong, they just never stopped to explain themselves to each other, and maybe they just never could. And with that, a misunderstanding that could have been settled in an honest conversation instead outlasted 3 presidencies. The silence finally broke in February of 2012 when Somers invited DeWitt onto her web show, Breaking Through. They hugged and cried. Somers said, "In a group of serious actors, I probably pissed you all off." DeWitt laughed, and just like that, 30 years dissolved in about 4 minutes. But that reunion carried weight neither of them could ignore. John Ritter, 1/3 of the roommates, had died in 2003. He never saw this moment. And here's the irony. The show, built entirely on misunderstandings, had its biggest one playing out completely off-screen, and the only person who might have fixed it sooner was already gone. And while those two weren't speaking, millions were humming a song with a secret nobody knew. The original plan was simple. Let Ritter, DeWitt, and Somers sing the theme. But that experiment ended rather quickly after producers changed their minds. They then called in Julia Rinker and the Ray Charles singers instead. And before you ask, no, not that Ray Charles. This was a completely different Ray Charles, a choral director who spent decades working alongside Perry Como. The soul legend had nothing to do with it. And the man who actually wrote Come and Knock on Our Door was Joe Raposo. This is the same composer behind the Sesame Street theme, Being Green, and C is for Cookie. The same brain that helped 3-year-olds learn their ABCs also wrote the song soundtracking the most innuendo-loaded apartment on American television. Let's zero in on Raposo for a moment. The guy studied in Paris and also graduated from Harvard. He could have written concert halls full of serious music. Instead, he chose television. He spent his time writing things people would actually remember. There's something quite confident about that choice. It shows a man who understood that reaching millions of ordinary people through their TVs was worth more than impressing a handful of super important and elite ones. And boy was he right, because almost half a century later, you still hear those first 4 notes and remember exactly where you were. But that nostalgic melody was not the only decision that quietly changed lives forever. Do you remember the goodbye scene in episode 21 of season 3? The Ropers hug Janet and Chrissy, holding on just a moment too long. You could see them holding back tears, trying not to let the moment fully sink in. Now, the emotions might double when you hear this next thing. Norman Fell never wanted to leave, but ABC kept pushing. They wanted the Ropers in their own series. To get Fell to agree, the producers put it in writing. If the Ropers was cancelled within a year, he and Audra Lindley could come straight back. Fell took the deal. The show launched in March 1979 and immediately looked like a smart bet. It finished the season ranked number 8 in the country. Then ABC moved it to Saturday nights, a killer time when everyone was out to dinner. The ratings nosedived, and the show was cancelled in May 1980. That cancellation date meant the show had technically run 2 seasons. The short spring run in 1979 and a full season that fall. The 2 seasons meant the contract was void. The calendar outmaneuvered Fell. The thing is, the Ropers were never meant to carry an entire show alone. In Three's Company, they were perfect as the nosy neighbors popping in for one scene, but as leads, that was recipe for disaster. Stanley's cheapness and Helen's frustration were bound to become monotonous after a while. In the end, some characters are best served in small doses. Fell knew it better than ABC. He just couldn't convince them in time. If that goodbye felt heavy, this final story hits somewhere even deeper. Season 6's opening seemed normal. A zoo, some animals, Joyce DeWitt feeding goats. And then a small boy in blue overalls toddled into the frame. Nobody planned for him to be there. Director Dave Powers was filming the location shoot at the Los Angeles Zoo with cast, crew, and their families in tow. And somewhere in that organized chaos, a toddler broke free from his mother's side. That toddler was Jason Ritter, Ritter's oldest son, barely old enough to walk. Maybe he just liked the goat, or maybe something in that little boy already knew he was meant for the cameras. Some kids run away from attention. Jason walked toward it before he could even tie his shoes. That sequence ran at the start of every episode from season 6 through season 8. 3 full seasons, millions of viewers, and almost nobody knew whose child that was for over 4 decades. Jason grew up, followed his father into acting, and built a career of his own. He's appeared in Girls, A Million Little Things, and the reboot of Matlock. By the time his dad passed away in 2003, Jason was 23. John Ritter spent 8 seasons making strangers laugh. He tripped over furniture, stumbled through misunderstandings, and turned a simple apartment into one of television's most beloved stages. And the whole time, his own son was right there with him, tucked into the opening credits of the show's final 3 seasons. Sometimes television gives you something no writer could ever put on the script: a father and his son sharing a screen, neither of them knowing what it would come to mean. 8 seasons, 1 apartment, and somehow Three's Company still has stories nobody's heard. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when the people on screen give you something genuinely worth remembering. Which fact shocked you the most? Tell us below. Remember to also like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more from Where This Came From.